Hello, everybody. Nelson Vergel here with ExcelMale.com and DiscountedLabs.com. I'm very happy to have Shalin Shah today, CEO of Marius Pharmaceuticals. They're the makers of Kyzatrex. It's an oral testosterone treatment, and we're here just to chat about the treatment, about misconceptions about oral testosterone, what makes Kyzatrex so different and so special, any potential side effects, dosing, etc. So this is a very informal chat, as you guys are used to seeing with ExcelMale.com. And first of all, Shalin, tell us a little bit about you and the history of the drug, approval, and all that.
Sure. No, thank you, Nelson. Happy to be here today. Excited to share the journey with you and your audience. I know you've been a long time advocate in the testosterone space, very knowledgeable and trying to educate the community. So glad to be here with all of you. So the Kyzatrex journey actually started back in 2009. There were a few ex-GSK scientists that decided that oral was much needed in this testosterone space. However, it has been notoriously hard to develop. So the team set off and went through a number of formulations, created some unique aspects which are the core of Kyzatrex today, one including phytosterol esters that have never been used in a pharmaceutical product, which help give Kyzatrex the bioavailability that it does have. So this was a very unique proposition that they'd set out, but of course, an FDA-approved product is a very long journey. So the formulation study continued, phase 1, phase 2, phase 2B, and so forth. And around the time of 2014 is when the FDA came down hard on the space. There were two studies in particular around cardiovascular safety, which were disproven at that time, but has still taken the industry quite a bit of time to recover from. But effectively, that really clamped down on the space. So I come from the investment world. We started looking at this drug back then when, again, it seemed to be that the industry was going through a bit of a tough time. And we went through the data, we went through the studies, spoke to some of the leading KOLs back then who are still present and active today. And we really came to the conclusion that said, if this wasn't called testosterone, this would probably be the most valuable and interesting molecule on the planet. And that again, what the myths and misconceptions were really not true. And adequate testosterone has a tremendous role in the body, both for males and females. So that's really what spurred us or myself to get involved, and we took the asset through 2 phase 3 trials, and then got it successfully approved by the FDA on our first shot in July of 22. And that's when effectively Kyzatrex entered the market about 6 months later.
So basically, many people didn't find out about this approval. Everybody was so worried about, we're getting out of COVID and all that. But do you think people out there, patients and doctors, know about the existence of a safe oral testosterone option?
Good question. So I think the sort of, let's call it, noise around oral is just beginning in earnest. So since we got approved, I think we spent a good part of a year really spending time with the leaders in urology and educating them and demonstrating. Of course, we had the FDA approval, so we had that stamp. But again, the long history of testosterone and orals, people were skeptical at the beginning, right? So I think we spent a lot of time with these leading KOLs across the country, including, Mohit Khaira's of the world, John Mulhall, Jesse Mills, et cetera, and really got them to see, let's call it, the power of Kyzatrex and how good it was, not just from an efficacy perspective, but also from a safety perspective. Because a lot of the issues with, say, injectables, right? This is the most dominant form of therapy and has been around the longest and most used. A lot of those side effects from our perspective, really limited the use of testosterone from the broader medical community because they, these are hassles. Frankly, we know physicians only have 7 minutes to deal with a patient. So do they really want to deal with the hassles or side effects that an injectable might create? And second, do they really want to spend the time teaching their patients, saying, hey, look, this is how you have to inject? It was a lose-lose scenario. So again, for us, I think at the beginning, we really wanted the backing of the most preeminent folks out there to say Kyzatrex should be the standard of care. And now that that is firmly established, again, this is being used in Baylor, UCLA, Cleveland Clinic, Sloan Kettering, et cetera. I think that has been established. And now we are able to go out there to the broader medical community, whether it's the providers or patients, and educate them on not just the existence of Kyzatrex, but really the why. And that's where we are today.
So let's go into the whys, and let's go stepwise, because now we have basically, obviously, gels and creams, compounded or pharma brands. We have the injections, testosterone cypionate, enanthate, ondecanoate, propionate. We have pellets, branded and compounded. We have nasal gels. We have, so basically the orals were the missing piece,
Sure.
The other options. So I like to compare Kyzatrex to each one of these options separately.
Right.
When it comes to pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages, if you don't mind doing that, starting with gels like an androgel or even a compounded product.
Sure. No, that makes sense, right? And I think I do want to say, right, the field is sort of, I don't want to say littered, but there are lots of options, right? So that can be confusing for patients to begin with. What we do see now, again, and we'll get into the safety and efficacy, I think we've created a paradigm shift, right? Where now you can separate, orals exist, and that option for the patients is just so simple. The therapy can now flourish for all of the reasons why your audience specifically probably understands why testosterone therapy is so good. But if you look at the broader male population, you have 20 million plus hypogonadal males out there that walk around, don't know their T levels, don't understand it. But again, the route of administration becomes convoluted. So I think much like other therapies, now when you have an oral, it becomes simpler. And I think this is frankly going to be tremendous for the healthcare system, including patients. But to get into your question on sort of the differences, so we ran our phase 3 trial against androgel, actually, right? Because androgel sort of being the gold standard historically from a branded perspective and whatnot, that was what we did. I think there's a number of differences when you look at Kyzatrex versus gels, right? And I can say these things considering that was what our trial was against. So if you look at efficacy rates were certainly higher in an oral. I think as you know, gels have varying absorption rates depending on skin type, obesity level or adipose fat and so on. So there's just a high level of variability when it comes to absorption of the testosterone. So we don't, we get around that with Kyzatrex. Yes, you take Kyzatrex with food, but outside of that, you're seeing pretty consistent levels regardless of your meal types. And so a patient could achieve this left and right. I think another big one, and this applies to all the categories of product in that sense. Now, again, not everything here is head to head. So I think we can rely on a lot of the literature that is out there, given how much research has been done on testosterone. But I think a big issue that we see today is hematocrit or erythrocytosis issues, right? This is definitely present in injections, but it does continue all the way through pellets and then gels. So on that, actually, Mohit Khera published a study a few years ago that looked at the rate of erythrocytosis across modalities. Now, if you take injections, this rate was actually 66%. 2 out of 3 developed erythrocytosis, which is very high. Pellets was second, and that was 35%. Then you had gels, which was 12%. In Kyzatrex, in our phase 3 trial, we saw about 2% rate of erythrocytosis. And what was nice was patients then down titrated their dose, and all cases of erythrocytosis resolved. So patients were able to resume therapy without either getting off the trial or without having to donate blood, which is a big, let's call it inconvenience, right, for patients and their providers too, because frankly, if I'm the provider, I don't want to worry about you going to do this. I want to, I want to make sure you're safe, but I can't control your day-to-day schedule. So I think the erythrocytosis is certainly a very big piece.
Let me just, before we move on, let me clarify what erythrocytosis is, or high hematocrit, to the audience that maybe some people may actually know what that is. It is a number one side effect of testosterone. And like you said, most options have that problem, that issue. It's being debated whether, what really means to have high hematocrit, meaning overproduction of red blood cells. Testosterone is a hemopoietic hormone. It enhances, it stimulates the production of red blood cells from the bone marrow. And actually, that's a good thing if you have low red blood cells or low hemoglobin or anemia. It's a wonderful thing to have more red blood cells. But it gets to a point, if you're obviously starting with normal red blood cells, where the increase of red blood cells increases viscosity in the blood. And we have data, not so much so on testosterone replacement, but in other conditions where the higher the hematocrit, the higher the cardiovascular risk. Obviously, viscosity of the blood increases dramatically, and the heart is a pump, and pumps, are affected by higher viscosity. But it is being debated what's the highest? Yeah, what's the highest? And we're starting to show up 50 to 53% on hematocrit. So in my case, obviously, I have ExcelMale.com. It has over 47,000 members, and that's a number one complaint. Not only having to go to donate blood because you want to decrease your hematocrit, your red blood cells, but also the frequency, and some people are becoming even anemic by donating so much and so frequently. So it is being kind of a nightmare management issue. And like you said, the physician doesn't have control over it. The patient has to go to a blood center. Sometimes they get rejected for blood donation, so they need a therapeutic phlebotomy, which is an order from the doctor. So it is really the most frustrating, I say it, part of mostly people that are using injectable testosterone, even with low doses, gels too. But I would say it's a number one management issue for most men on my network. So whatever option that comes up with lower levels of hematocrit or increases of hematocrit are attracted to me. That's why I decided to use oral myself, the Kyzatrex, and just to see what the hematocrit was. And it never went up beyond 50, which is very good for me, and all the other values that we're going to talk about. So that for me is the most attractive thing. Not only the fact that you're taking an oral every day with food, you have to eat food anyways, but also the fact that many men are really worried about transferring testosterone to their female partners, to their kids, if you're using like androgel or any of the creams and gels. So that's also not there when it comes to oral. So many advantages that I see, but hematocrit is definitely, I would say, number one.
Right.
Obviously, we have other things that we can talk about, but so I'm glad to see that. But is this hematocrit issue, the fact that you guys are showing better data when it comes to, or lower hematocrit incidence, high hematocrit incidence, is that because of the blood levels that are reached, or is it something special about the oral product that?
Good question. So what we see in some sense, taking a step back, Kyzatrex at large restores patients to mid-normal therapeutic levels of testosterone, right? So, and I think this is, again, why historically, versus injections, that injections just cause a more, a higher number of different side effects, because at the end of the day, in those injections, most often, even if you want to sort of decrease the dose intervals, right, to avoid some of these things, you're still sending, patients are still getting sent to super physiological levels. Often I hear of 2, 3, 5,000 nanograms per deciliter, even if it is for that interval period before sort of normalizing. Kyzatrex, at the end of the day, is, again, a daily treatment, as we know. So it more closely mimics what is that natural diurnal rhythm, right? At the end of the day, or to the end of that second dose, your body's going back to baseline. So it has this rest period to a certain degree where you don't have the endogenous testosterone in your body, and the theory is that it sort of gives your pituitary time to rest. But to your point, yes, so you're at these mid-normal levels, and we see that as probably being one of the major drivers around all major testosterone side effects. So for example, let's look at LH and FSH, right? On Kyzatrex, what we saw in our phase 3 trials, and then also in real world data from a number of our KOLs, is these numbers don't go down to zero like they do in injections. So them not going, like as I mentioned, that rest period, your pituitary, when that testosterone is out of your system, your pituitary thinks to yourself, hey, we got to get back to work, right? I have a job to do. So I think that's really where you see some of these levels, and what those implications are, we're still testing. As you know, we're running a fertility study at Baylor currently to look at what are those effects on sperm, and can patients maintain adequate sperm levels on Kyzatrex. And again, just back on that hematocrit point, the other interesting bit is, and this is again is data that will be released later this year. One of our KOLs has an abstract submitted, and that will be published later this year. We've seen these types of positive outcomes, hematocrit, LH-FSH, et cetera, on max dosage of Kyzatrex too. So that's 400 milligrams BID. So I think it's really encouraging to see that this premise of on-off is continuing to hold throughout the dosing ranges of Kyzatrex.
Yeah, I'm very, very interested in the emerging data that you guys are gathering. The suppression, or the total suppression of what we call the hypothalamic pituitary testicular axis, HPTA axis, it's concerning, not only because obviously fertility goes down really fast, sperm count goes down really fast with testosterone, injectables or gels, within the first week or 2 weeks, you already see a change. And nobody has looked at, and this is something that I always obsess about, on the long-term consequences of shutting down your HPTA axis completely. I mean, LH is 0, FSH is 0. So I'm always wondering, and I've been on testosterone for 38 years, obviously with a very suppressed HPTA. I never was looking forward to having kids anyways, but a lot of the men on my networks are really concerned. And obviously the doctors either take them off testosterone if they need to be fertile, put them on HCG, Clomid, all the other stuff. Right. That actually is a more complicated way to have normal testosterone levels and remain fertile. So another one of those things that I'm really looking forward to seeing.
I think it's very important too, because if you look at general demographic trends, right? We've seen this, and I'm sure everyone's seen the charts, right? The average testosterone level over the past few decades continues to drop. And this issue is just, whether it's, more lifestyle related, et cetera, just like we saw the rise in obesity or type 2 diabetes, is that the same curve that testosterone deficiency is going along? Most likely so. So you see younger and younger folks with testosterone deficiency today. And again, this didn't exist a couple decades ago. So I think what we're evaluating here, and like you're mentioning, the long-term effects, which are still being investigated, are more important now than ever because of this increased demographic of testosterone deficient folks.
Yeah, that's for sure. So So interesting that you guys are spending some funds on answering some questions that I don't know anybody else that has actually spent any time or effort on that. When it comes to comparing, then something I want to jump into right now is the biggest myth of oral testosterone out there. I mean, I have a Facebook group of 27,000 men, and I have obviously ExcelMale.com 48,000. So I see what's happening out there when it comes to at least people in my network, the guys on my network. When I post something about oral testosterone, because there's data coming through, in different ways, everybody, the first thing they say is, this is liver toxic. I will not take this. Liver toxic. So tell me a little bit about what makes the product so different compared to the old methyl testosterone back in, 40, 50 years ago.
Yep, exactly. So exactly what everyone is referring to in those messages is old methyl testosterone, right? So the difference here now is Kyzatrex is lymphatically absorbed. So, and that's again why you take it with food. So it's been uniquely designed to bypass the liver and again be absorbed through the lymphatics. And this is there was a product that did this in Europe earlier, but it wasn't dosed appropriately. So you didn't, again, it never took off. But Kyzatrex bypasses the liver. And I think that, you're combating, 2 years of this information that's being out there now versus this 50, 60 years. So it's going to take a little time for the entire sort of medical community and patient community to know and grasp this. But this is really the breakthrough now. This is safe for the liver. If you look at liver enzymes throughout the studies, everything remained in the normal ranges. Actually, testosterone undecanoate, which is the API, is being investigated for liver conditions such as NASH today. So not only again is it liver safe, it's being explored for potential liver benefits, and I think that's really a 180 compared to where it's been. I think the other interesting thing to also know is, again, as I mentioned, the journey of Kyzatrex, right? The R&D since 2009. So Kyzatrex and FDA-approved products, at least in oral testosterone, are the only ones that have demonstrated this liver safety. You see papers, you see other literature and whatnot, and there are, frankly, a number of compounders out there today too that claim liver safety. But I think, frankly, for your patients or in your audience, it's important to know there's no data around compounded formulation in oral. So, and again, this will be public soon. But if Marius describes sort of the unique mechanisms that you even see sort of the degradation of the soft gel capsule, because this is a soft gel, not a tablet, right? Where the times of degradation for that soft gel and how it allows it to get to the lymphatic portion for dissolution, if you will. Very important. And again, the data is there. So we feel good. We can stand on that and resolve this myth. It should not be a concern for any patients today.
Good. That's good to clarify, because that's I have to clarify that myself almost daily when we talk about orals. When it comes to lipids like cholesterol, LDL, HDL, triglycerides, what does the data look like from the phase 3?
Sure. So the data, actually, you see pretty much a beneficial drop across the board. Total cholesterol is down, LDL is down a bit. Trigs do come down as well, so you see a better metabolic profile. The HDL also does come down, so I think that's one point patients should be aware of, right? You can see you also see a slight reduction in HDL. And so this is what the data says, right? What I would point, and again, this is our commitment to sort of long-term data, is what we want to see over time is how metabolically healthy these patients become, right? And that's going to take 3-5 years of data tracking. If you look at sort of our colleagues out in Europe, there's been great registry studies that have been done on the long-term health and even lipid profiles of these patients. So we will, time will tell naturally. But I think, again, as most at least in this form, understand the role of testosterone, you should see sort of metabolic effects of the same magnitude.
Yeah. What people don't know, and I encourage everybody to Google it, is the fact that testosterone definitely has been shown to decrease triglycerides in most forms, all options, I would say. It has an effect of decreasing a little bit HDL. The higher the dose, they lower the HDL, and the HDL is a good cholesterol. But nobody talks about lipoprotein A. Lipoprotein A decreases significantly with testosterone treatment. And that's a very important thing because lipo A is a very difficult thing to lower.
Right.
Right. And that's, I hope that you guys, in your research, explore that, because no other company has. And it's amazing that, and now obviously we're talking more about lipo A and lipo B, lipoprotein.
Sure.
So now I think we have a higher awareness. Not everybody, obviously, but physicians do, cardiologists do. So I'm looking forward to seeing the data on lipo.
Sure. No, it's absolutely a great point that you brought up. So I think, we're definitely committed to exploring that in our research. As you say, I think it's just emerging, the role of lipoprotein A and how it should be checked and monitored in patients. There are no therapeutic products for it today. But again, if the research can show, a 20-30% reduction in LPA that you cannot get otherwise, I mean, that is actually a tremendous benefit. So I think, and as you mentioned, cardiologists understand this. So that's actually where we see this potentially going. As we spend more time, as I mentioned, we've really solidified that urology space and Kyzatrex being, sort of the path to standard of care. I think the cardiology community is really where we're going to be spending a lot of time next, because there's no reason why this should not be integrated, or at least, again, it starts with checking levels, right? Check the levels and understand where these patients are at. Yes, they have to be symptomatic for therapy and so forth, but I think better awareness will lead to, frankly, just better outcomes down the road.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of cardiologists are testosterone phobic, but not all of them.
Because of those studies, right? So Traverse, I mean, we have not spoken about Traverse yet. At the end of the day, Traverse in June 23, flat out puts to bed this myth of cardiovascular risk. And again, this is what the FDA wanted. So the medical community obviously needs to be apprised of it. Does that take time? For sure. But again, the beauty also goes in not just that study that exists now. I mean, that's a landmark 5,000 patient randomized, double-blind placebo-controlled study. It cannot get better than that, right? So you take that and then couple it with some of those things that we mentioned regarding Kyzatrex in terms of erythrocytosis and so forth. I think one can make some conclusions about what that means and what that allows then clinicians to be able to do with Kyzatrex for testosterone therapy.
Now let's get into something that a lot of guys are obsessed with, trying to get their sex hormone binding globulin to go down so that they can have more free testosterone. As we know, some data, we don't have very good data on free testosterone, but the data that we have shows that that really is the most important marker to be testing for, to be following and monitoring.
Right.
The only bad thing is that all guidelines, medical guidelines, really are based on total testosterone because it was easier to measure total testosterone in the past 20 years, and free testosterone, it really is a very delicate test that equilibrium, dialysis is actually the gold standard, but most doctors were not using that. So the data that we have on all the studies on total testosterone was reliable, but on free testosterone was calculated. So free testosterone is a new player because now we have fancier, better testing. I mean, on discounted labs, I sell a free and total testosterone by liquid chromatography, mass spectrometry, and free by equilibrium dialysis. But now that we have that, and we have, I sell it at a really reasonable price, people can actually follow and monitor the free testosterone. Let's talk about the effect on what you saw in phase 3 or the emerging data that you're seeing on free testosterone and Kyzatrex.
Sure. No, great point. And this is, again, it really draws the line in the sand. And as I mentioned, a paradigm shift, because Kyzatrex, again, takes patients to that mid-range of normal levels. But what happens in concert is we see SHBG drop by an average of 30%. And this is from our phase 3 trial, an average of 30%. And some of that emerging data sees it up to almost 50%, which is a pretty substantial drop also for a population that frankly has elevated SHBG levels, these days anyway, whether that's from alcohol consumption or lifestyle, or again, just an aging population. SHBG goes up over time, even for that healthy male. So, that 30% drop in the phase 3 trial consequently led to an increase of free T by 2 times. And emerging data is showing these increases anywhere from 3 to 5 times. So again, these abstracts that will be coming out later this year are going to be very, very interesting for the both the clinical and patient community. But ultimately, that's why we see a lot of good patient response symptomatically to Kyzatrex. So again, we know patients have been programmed at large to say, okay, what's my number, right? And often doctors ask them how they're feeling before telling them their number because they don't want to bias that. And again, understandably so, it's something to hang on to, numerical value and so forth. But what we see emerging here is really that free T being the driver. And we, a lot of our KOLs all encourage testing of both SHBG and free T to really get this whole picture. So you're not just looking at total T, but you're looking at the combination of them to understand what's happening to the patient, and then it might map mirror to that symptomatic relief.
Yeah. Hey, tell the audience what KOLs are, because I know what that is, but
Sure. Yeah, KOLs, key opinion leaders, right? So these are again the clinicians around the country that are andrology or testosterone experts, and they have been doing this. We're fortunate to have the like minds of folks that have been doing this for the last 30, 40 years, and truly the thought leaders and research pioneers in this space. So you go to mariuspharma.com, you'll see a lot of these names that we've been working with, and we love to get into the research of what they do and so forth. But that's really the stamp, I guess, let's call it, that has been put on a lot of the work that we've done.
Good to explain that to people. KOLs. I was called KOL once back into this when I was working with pharma, because it's anybody that can have integral part in educating, making sure that the thought leaders and patients would actually get information to them. So it didn't only include clinicians, doctors, nurses, mid-levels, educated patient advocates, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Last but not least, because this is another one of those side effects that affects mostly older men, men with metabolic issues, especially metabolic, blood pressure and water retention. Very rarely, that side effects rarely discussed in conferences. I go to urology conferences, even cardiology, and it's rarely mentioned. And I want to find out what you guys, your data has shown on blood pressure increases.
So again, I'll reference our data in our phase 3 study. So Kyzatrex, we ran in the phase 3 study, we actually ran what is known as ambulatory blood pressure. So this is a 24-hour cuff that's actually around the patient, instead of the typical is in the office, you go in, put the cuff on, measure it once or twice, take some averages, and that's what's typically done. But for us, we actually ran this ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, which is by far the gold standard in the space, regardless of therapeutic. Any drug, if they're using what's called ABPM, that is known by the clinical community to be the gold standard. So that's what we did in our trial.
Yeah, wait. So people walk around with cuff around, or is that one of those? Oh, really?
Yep, 24 hours. So that's why it's a bit invasive in the scheme of things, right? It's not convenient for somebody to do that. Even while they're sleeping, they're measuring the blood pressure. So this is, again, that's why the level of rigor is much higher than what would be done in clinic. And frankly, that's why our results at 6 months we showed, or 4 months rather, we showed a 1.7 millimeter increase in systolic blood pressure, right? Average. And yeah, for most of the clinicians that you talk to, that's clinically insignificant. Your blood pressure rises more by walking up the stairs. Not minimizing what those patients, different patient profiles may mean, but 1.7 millimeters was what we saw. And then we also checked again at 6 months, and that level had plateaued. So we did not see any further increases from that level, right? What would happen, further down the line, as again, patients get metabolically healthy, is something we're going to investigate. But 1.7 millimeters, I think if patients bring up with their cardiologist, they should see, they should have a fairly positive conversation. We don't have, we haven't done this versus injections. I think there are probably hypotheses that again tie back to the total T levels, right, and what that means for blood pressure, things like edema, and so forth. But I think from our clinical anecdotal, this has been a good result.
So tell the audience a little bit about the different dosing or the capsules and what the different doses are that are available.
Sure. So Kyzatrex comes in 3 capsules: 100 milligrams, 150 milligrams, and 200 milligrams. The dosing, though, is what's important, and I'll focus on the 2 main doses that we've seen from in real world use. Most of the patients, even in the phase 3, most of the patients ended up on 300 milligrams BID, so 300 milligrams in the morning, 300 milligrams in the evening, 600 milligrams total daily dose. The second most common dose that we see is actually 400 milligrams BID. That's 400 in the morning, 400 in the evening. And that's actually where, the abstract that I mentioned, you're going to see data around that 400 milligram BID dose.
Good. Yeah. I'm taking, as I said before, I'm taking the drug. I've never taken orals before. I wrote 3 books, and I tried every single option to write from my perspective. So obviously, I just finished my 4th book, Beyond Testosterone. I wanted to include oral testosterone commentary. That's what I call it. So I started taking the 400 milligram twice a day dose. I didn't have blood pressure increases, and that's usually my issue: water retention, blood pressure. Hematocrit stayed stable, 50. A little bump, but nothing critical. And I didn't have any water retention, which is a very big deal for me. I get
Sure.
so far, and the levels, the total T was 800.
Okay.
That's all, you don't need more than that, especially if you want to avoid long-term consequences. And the free T definitely was like at 3%, 2.5%, which is very good. I usually have a hard time.
Higher end of the range, correct.
Yeah. So far so good, I take 2 capsules twice a day with food. I take a bunch of other meds because of different conditions I have. But so far, and digestive, my gut is doing well. That's something I was very concerned about,
Right.
About orals. So far, I'm pretty happy with it. I think it's something that I would have probably tried a long time ago, because it's practical. Injections sometimes, many people in my networks are injecting once, twice, or 3 times a week. Some are going, it's a new thing, a new fad, daily injections, micro dosing, to avoid a lot of the hematocrit issues, etc. So in my world, and I come from a long history of all kinds of medical, for HIV and cancer. In my world, there's such a thing as needle fatigue. People don't get it. You may not get it the first year or the 6th, but eventually, because we had studies on different products that were used, especially for HIV, that needle fatigue, your mind just gets tired.
Sure.
The needles.
I can imagine. I mean, and again, if you're one that is doing it on a decreased interval, think about your travel, right? You're bringing these supplies, you're bringing, all of this as you go,
Yeah.
it cannot be conducive to the traveling, male.
Yeah. Yeah. So last but because I think we're close to an hour, let's talk about access.
Sure.
Access issues. What does that mean? Um, Orals have been pushed back. There's a lot of pushback from insurance orals, and they always push back on the newest thing anyways. And they're
Correct.
always trying to the doctor to prescribe whatever, the lowest cost or injections or whatever. So tell us a little bit how people access Kyzatrex and what you guys have done to improve that access.
Right. So this was a big, we all know insurance companies are not our friends, not patient friendly. As you mentioned, they push you to low price therapies and so forth. So this was a big decision for Marius as we launched Kyzatrex. We decided to launch Kyzatrex as a cash only product. We decided to forego insurance contracts and PBMs and effectively cut out that layer. It doesn't help patients, right? That layer actually adds cost to the systems. So we cut that layer out and created Kyzatrex as a cash product. And whether that's you're going to your regular provider or clinician to obtain it, or alternatively, we've partnered with a number of telehealth companies today that have set up very robust systems for patients to go ahead and get Kyzatrex. You still get your blood work, you still have a clinician consultation, but then if qualified, you can also get Kyzatrex. So we see this as being the best way for again broad access. I think the price point, which is, let's call it, depending on again where it is around the $200 per month range. But you're not, often you're not buying things like HCG, or you're not, using an anastrozole. These, we have not, we have not talked about that, but we did not see increases in estradiol at large. So patients don't have to worry about taking that. You don't have to worry about the supplies, your needles and so on and so forth. So I think on a net basis, it's actually in line with the current therapies. But your providers, I think the other side of this is making it easy for clinicians and providers, because as we talked about earlier in the call, is one is they probably don't want to teach you how to inject. That's a lot of time that frankly they don't get compensated for. But second is, when you look at the staff burden of testosterone prescriptions, it's incredibly high and frustrating for both staff and then patients who ultimately don't get access. And that's why you've seen compounders really, let's call it, blossom in the space, because they've gotten rid of that. And that's also a cash pay model. So that's the decision that we've taken to actually drive access. Even though it sounds counterintuitive, I think that's actually the way patients are going to get Kyzatrex. And we've seen it again. A lot of this DTC market has all gone cash. Functional medicine, all gone cash. Wellness, concierge, longevity, right? All of these things have gone that way because patients are a little fed up with the traditional system.
Yeah, insurance, pushback. I sell blood tests, cash base. You can buy your own blood test without having to see a doctor. We have doctors in our board, but the whole headache of not having to deal with insurance pushbacks or rejections, and doctors are spending so many hours. They are not compensated on trying to write medical necessity letters and etc.
I mean, I'll give you an example. Right?
Hmm?
I mean, I have good insurance. I went to get a comprehensive blood panel, and including my testosterone and whatnot. I got a bill for nearly $1,000.
Yep.
And I would have been way better off paying cash out of my pocket, probably $150 for the same panel. So I think, and I'm sure again, a lot of your audience has probably experienced that today, and hence has gone this route. So yeah, I think again, we are really our aim is to be a patient-centric company at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it was creative. It's the first company that I see doing that, because it removes one barrier of access. So how can anybody find more information besides obviously going to ExcelMale.com? I have a lot of educational info there. A lot of people are sharing their experiences there too. But how can somebody find more information or actually try to get access to the
Sure. So two places I would recommend is naturally Kyzatrex.com, right? That's going to have a lot of the data that we talked about from our phase 3 trials, where to get it, whether that's clinicians themselves, sort of brick and mortar, or some of our telehealth providers that are out there, so they can find sort of the best option that works for them. And the other bit too, and we'll talk more about this in that sense, is our disease website. RethinkTestosterone.com can really share a lot about the broader therapy and what testosterone is involved in and so forth. So I think it's a good tool for patients to educate themselves on.
Well, thank you so much. I think I think we covered a lot of ground. And hopefully we can help demystify this option, oral testosterone. So
Absolutely.
thanks a lot, Shalin. I appreciate your taking the time to educate patients out there. And hopefully we'll have some more on the product and the new data that is coming up.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Nelson, and look forward to engaging with the audience more in the future.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.